first things first, KM Malta Airlines. What's your thoughts so far?
I don't have many thoughts on them. I think, they have been restructured. I think they seem to be operating fine. I think they do a good job here. It's vital, I think, that we have two strong airlines on the island of Malta. KM serves most of the high-cost airport destinations beloved by politicians and bureaucrats, and Malta Air delivers all the growth on and off the island. So I think Malta has the benefit of having two strong airlines, one growing and the other one looking after the politicians and the bureaucrats.
I mean, you've kind of maybe seemed a bit sceptical, though, with these sort of state-run airlines in the past. I mean, do you think the model can work?
No. I mean, there's no evidence that the state-run airlines model works. If you look across Europe, all of the state-run airlines are now finding a way either being bought or merging into the three big high-fare groups, Lufthansa, Air France, KLM, and IAG. So IAG has mopped up Aer Lingus in Ireland, Iberia, BA. They'd like to buy TAP. Air France has merged with KLM. They've taken a stake in SAS in Scandinavia. And Lufthansa has bought Austrian, Swiss, SN Brussels. They've now bought 41% of Alitalia. And they've recently taken a 10% stake in Air Baltic. So all of the loss-making flag carrier airlines are kind of finding their way into one of the big three big high-fare conglomerates, which is not good for competition or consumers because you're all going to pay higher and higher airfares. But it's very good for Ryanair's growth because it means there's even more opportunity for us to grow, taking advantage of the huge cost leadership we have over those flag carrier airlines and growing by passing on lower fares.
So doesn't that mean, though, that you think KM Malta Airlines can't work based on that analysis then?
Well, I mean, they can't work as an independent airline. Like, ultimately, I think KM Malta Airlines belongs in one of the bigger international groups, or whether that's as a subsidiary of or as a partner of. It needs to be in one of those bigger international groups because it's too small to survive as an independent airline on its own. It has a high cost structure. But we wish it well. We don't see ourselves as competing that much with it because they go to kind of Charles de Gaulle or Frankfurt and Heathrow, and we go to Beauvais, Stansted and Frankfurt Hahn, but we do at a fraction of the price. So this year, as we've announced this morning, we expect to grow this year, carry 5 million passengers on and off the island of Malta, whereas I think KM Airlines does about 2 million passengers. So Malta's the beneficiary of having competition and choice between KM Malta Airlines and Malta Air.
Mm-hmm. Just one more thing on KM. In October, the finance minister said he was looking for maybe a 30% investment in the airline from the private sector, and he said particularly those that have experience within the sector. Would you be interested?
I don't think that would be allowed because, it would mean we would have a quasi-monopoly on and off the island of Malta. I think what the finance minister was looking for was to encourage Air France or KLM or Air France or Lufthansa or IAG to take a stake in KM Malta, and I think that we would encourage that. I mean, we've been very supportive, for example, of Lufthansa taking a 41% stake in ITA, the Italian, or the former Alitalia. And we think Lufthansa taking a stake in KM Malta would also be good ultimately for the long-term future of KM Malta. But the long-term future of KM Malta is you can't compete with Ryanair on price. So keep doing what you're doing at the main airports, but Ryanair will be delivering all the growth on and off the island.
Okay, thank you. Now, I don't know if you're aware, there was a recent incident at Malta International Airport.
Was there?
Yes.
There's always an incident at Malta International Airport. What was this one?
This involved a group of men who tried to escape into Malta. Now, 2 of them were apprehended and 2 of them did manage. They jumped down from the aircraft, they ran across the apron and disappeared into Malta. I mean, you're the boss of an airline. Is this concerning?
I mean, it'd be kind of worrying, but what aircraft did they jump down off?
I don't know.
I'm not quite sure what that would achieve. I mean, nobody gets on board. If you take Ryanair, nobody gets on board an aircraft without having your documentation. So if somebody was to run off an aircraft, we would know who they were or where the documentation was.
So in this instance, that it was a medical emergency. That some doubts were raised about afterwards. Yeah, they did an emergency landing in Malta. They weren't scheduled to stop here, and then once the plane landed, 4 guys jumped down. 2 of them were apprehended, and two disappeared into Malta. I mean,
very strange. They'd have been much better off flying scheduled Ryanair flight. It would have cost them.
But seriously, does this give you concerns about security at the airport?
Not really. I mean, look. To be fair, I don't think security at the airport is an issue. There will always be incidents with, I mean, I don't know whether this was illegal migration or what it was, but if you take, I mean, in the context of the total traffic at Malta over a full year is close to 10 million passengers. A medical emergency diverts in here and two fellas run off the plane. Like, no, does that ultimately alter, or does it alter or bring into question security at Malta Airport? No, it doesn't. In fact, if anything, it shows how good the security is.
Really, but they escaped from the airport. So.
What do you mean they escaped? Like, they weren't jailed at the airport.
No, that's true. But it was, if you like, irregular migration. They were from Morocco and they disappeared undocumented into the country, and
that's a challenge facing all countries. But the big scale of illegal migration or undocumented migration is not coming through airports. It's coming through across on boats and dinghies and God knows what else. It is a challenge facing all European countries who are struggling to control illegal movement of people. But it's not really an issue at an airport. If two people break the system here at Malta Airport in a year where they're going to carry 10 million people, I think it shows that the systems are pretty good at Malta.
Okay.
At the airport.
So not concerned. Maybe a bit embarrassing, but not concerned.
I mean, I have 4 teenage children. I embarrass them on a daily basis, so we shouldn't get too lost up on being embarrassed.
Okay, all right, thank you. Now, one thing we've had in Malta a couple of times is where people arrive on a flight and they're rather inebriated and have to be taken off. Now, I understand that you've spoken out about this before and have actually...
Repeatedly.
Yes, and have actually called for a 2-drink limit at EU airports. Would you advocate this, and would you say that this should be done at Malta? I mean, I should stress the people, we're coming into Malta, but do you think this should be an EU-wide rule?
I think there should be an EU-wide rule. Like, we don't understand why there's no licensing regulations on sale of alcohol at airports. I mean, you go to many EU airports, they're selling pints of beer at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. Like, people should not be consuming alcohol at 6 o'clock in the morning, going to football matches. And it is a real problem for us and for other airlines. Increasingly, you have a mix of people who are, and the challenge arises, particularly during the summer when flights are delayed. You have ATC delays, particularly, and you have people who may not fly regularly, going on their holidays, thinking the holiday starts at the airport, and they start loading up on pints. And it's our people who have to deal with it. So the thing about, but would Ryanair limit the flights, the drinks on board to 2? No problem. In fact, very few of our people drink more than 1 drink on board in a flight at 2. Cabin crew are used to if somebody's misbehaving or somebody's not following, they won't serve them alcohol. The challenge we have is that people are getting on board an aircraft who are already inebriated. They're then flying up to third time. In some cases, they're mixing that with drugs, and then the behaviour becomes unacceptable. We've now taken it further. We think there should be a limit of 2 alcoholic drinks per person at an airport. We don't see why after 2 drinks you don't have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Fine. We limit the amount of duty-free you can buy at an airport, so why can't we limit the amount of drink you can buy at an airport? And we are to the fore now. We're taking legal action against the problem we have with these passengers is, if we divert to an airport and offload an inebriated passenger, the local police don't want to deal with them. So they kind of say, I mean, we had one in Porto in Portugal last year. They say, well, look, that was an Irish airline. He was an Irish citizen. We're now suing that guy in Dublin court for €15,000 because our flight had to divert into Porto. The crew went out of hours. We had to accommodate 180 people in hotels in Porto at short notice. And we believe those passengers who create that kind of carnage should pay the costs.
And you mentioned drugs there. Have you seen any change in this? Is this becoming an increasing problem?
Of course, it's becoming an increasing societal problem. Historically, people used to have drink at the airport. I mean, if somebody had too much drink on them, but generally they get on board the plane, they'd fall asleep. Now you tend to have a mix of alcohol and drugs, and people are much more energised or aggressive. Now, cabin crew are well trained, and they can deal with 99% of these cases on a professional basis. But in some cases, people are out of control. And the only way we can deal with that, and the other airlines can deal with that, is divert to the nearest airport and offload them. But they don't face any significant consequences when they get offloaded.
One thing I wanted to ask you about was someone who's made a lot of headlines around the world recently, which is Donald Trump. And I understand you sort of spoke maybe sort of favourably about him, saying maybe it'll sort of wake up. I mean, this is some Fortune.com report that maybe it'll sort of wake up liberals in the EU. What's your take on Donald Trump? And do you think this is going to change? Is it going to change European aviation in any way?
Well, I mean, certainly, A, I wouldn't have voted for him if I had a vote in the American election, but B, he's now the president. Some of his policies are not wrong. the kind of, and particularly you look at Europe, which is a incredibly inefficient and uncompetitive place, has spent far too much time, pushing these kind of environmental taxation when taxing air travel has no impact on the environment whatsoever. Aviation accounts for 2% of CO2 emissions. I think that's not necessarily wrong. Certainly, if he could deliver a quick ceasefire in Ukraine, I think that would be very welcome. But I do believe the combination of having Trump in the White House, threatening tariffs, and also the Draghi report in Europe focuses European minds or the European Commission on how do we make Europe more productive and more competitive.
Okay, but I mean, you've been very kind of anti-aviation taxes, as you've just said there. But I mean, when we talk about environmental taxes, I mean, surely it's only fair if every other sector is getting taxed. And I know in the past you've said, maritime industry is not getting tax on emissions. They are now. We now have the ETS system. I mean, surely in a system where we're taxing every emitter of pollution, aviation is fair game.
But it's not. I mean, firstly, we don't tax every emitter. Road transport accounts for 27% of Europe's CO2 emissions. Cement production accounts for 23%. They're the two biggest suppliers. We don't tax cement production. We don't tax motor cars. Now, motor cars do pay national tax on fuel and on vehicle registration, but none of it is pushed as some environmental measure. I mean, but you look at what we're doing as a society, road transport will electrify over the next decade. So we are making enormous gains. The argument I've made is, what is the point of taxing short-haul EU air travel when it accounts for less than 50% of Europe's aviation emissions?
But can't you see...
We exempt long-haul air travel, which accounts for 55% of Europe's CO2 emissions. So the only people we tax are Europe's citizens, and the people we exempt are the richest Americans, Gulf princes and Russians and Asians flying to Europe. So they get a complete freebie despite the fact that they create the majority of the emissions. It makes absolutely no sense. There is, and we do have a challenge to decarbonise aviation. The way to do that is not taxing it so the governments just trouser more tax, which they then piss away on the way governments piss away tax revenue anyway. It is to invest in new technology. Our new aircraft, we're costing us over 100 million apiece, carry 20% more passengers, burn 20% less fuel. That's a 40% reduction in fuel and CO2 emissions per passenger, and they're 50% quieter as well. That's the way forward. But treating aviation as if it's some kind of cash cow for lazy governments. I mean, the French government couldn't balance a budget to save their lives. They now propose to treble aviation tax as a solidarity tax. What's that all about? So, we need to push back on this bullshit idea that we can just tax the shit out of air travel. And the countries that suffer most in that are not the Belgians and the Dutch, who exempt their airlines from these taxes. It's the poor old dumb Irish, the Maltese, the Cypriots, the Portuguese and the Greeks on the periphery of Europe. The good news is that the Eastern European countries have had enough of it. So the Italians, the Poles have all said no more environmental taxes on aviation. We're not having it. It penalises the peripheral states and produces absolutely no benefit whatsoever.
Okay, thank you. Last thing, Boeing.
Yep.
I mean, how's that going? Because obviously
they continue to be very frustrating to deal with. We were supposed to get 9 aircraft before the end of December 2024 and then 15 aircraft before June 2025. We'll now only get 9 aircraft before the end of June 2025. They're going to be 12 months late with the 29 aircraft that we were supposed to get for summer 25, we will now only get for summer 26. Mm-hmm. So we've had to walk back our growth. Last year we were supposed to grow to 205 million passengers, the number will be 200. In FY26, which is summer of 2025, we were supposed to grow to 215 million passengers. We will be lucky to get to 206 million. So it's frustrating, they're running behind, but then so is Airbus. And that's one of the reasons, I think, one of the real threats for European aviation is capacity is so constrained. There's a real risk that pricing might rise in the next year or two, or airfares might rise above inflation for the next year or two, which I think is not good for aviation or tourism across Europe.
But I mean, those delays were partly caused by strikes over concerns over safety. I mean, as obviously, as you said, you carry a lot of passengers all across Europe. I mean, January last year, a part of the Boeing aircraft sort of blew out.
The Alaskan Air.
Yeah, I mean, isn't this must be worrying for you?
I mean, it is worrying, and we have spent a lot of time and resources. Like we have a team of engineers in Wichita where they make the fuselages, and Seattle where they make the final aircraft, supervising the quality. To be fair to Boeing, after the Alaskan Airlines door blowout last year, they were grounded for about 3 months. Quality has significantly improved. They are no longer taking defects down along the line. Oh, we'll repair them when they go out. They're stopping the line and fixing the defects on an ongoing basis. So we're now getting much better aircraft. But Boeing has failed to recover. I mean, they were supposed to produce 38 aircraft a month through November, December, January, February. They had a strike in October, November. They only produced 25 aircraft in January. So Boeing are still struggling to get back up to reach their production targets, which is why Boeing are running well behind on deliveries. But so are Airbus. And yet Airbus attracts none of the negative publicity that Boeing have done. But you're absolutely right. Quality and safety is a prerequisite, and if that means we have to take aircraft deliveries slower while they fix the quality, then we're all in favour of that. But ultimately, we do need to get Airbus have produced an aircraft that every engine has to come off the wing for a 12-month repair. So they both have their challenges. We want to see both Boeing and Airbus go back to producing 40 or 50 aircraft a month. We want to see these supply delays ironed out because we want to continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. So in a word, do Maltese flyers need to be worried?
No. You've been flying on Ryanair now since 2006. Maltese flyers, the only concern for Maltese flyers is how do they get the next cheap Ryanair seat. We have a seat sale for Thursday night now at 100,000 seats for $24.99. You look at the kind of our continuing growth. 2 years ago, we carried 183 million passengers. Last year, that grew 9% to 200 million passengers, and we would hope it to grow by 3% in the next 12 months to 206 million passengers. People cannot get enough of Ryanair's low fares or our great Boeing aircraft.